105.5 WDHA here on the morning jolt. I'm Jim Monaghan, and my guest is, well, if you've listened to me for any amount of time, you know I can quote scenes from the movie Bull Durham. He's the man responsible for it, and he's got a brand new book out called Church of Baseball, The Making of Bull Durham. Ron Shelton, good morning and welcome.
I'm glad to be here.
So as I'm going through the book, there's a connection that I never made. And, you talk about a lot about old Westerns in the book. And I never made that connection of Kevin Costner's character as the gunslinger coming into, shape up the town. I never realized how much of that connection was there.
Yeah, he's a guy who is excellent at his job. He's the consummate professional, and he goes where he's hired, and he does his job great, and then he gets run out of town. And he, like a Western archetype, you don't know where he's from, you don't know his background, you know nothing about him ever. And that's why I've always thought of this as a Western.
You reference Sam Peckinpah in the book a lot. I'm about a third of the way through your book, and you reference him a lot. How much of an influence did he have on this movie?
Well, he inspired me to make movies. His movies were complex. Um, they were about shifting loyalties. They were always about men sort of searching for a moral framework in life that were sort of lost. Uh, but it's hard to connect Sam's movies to mine, except that he was an inspiration. And I ended up working with a lot of people who were on his team, who are part of my team now. So I just think he's an American master.
TV Westerns, you talk about them a lot as well. And I'm a huge fan of late 50s and early 1960s Westerns, especially the ones that came out of Warner Brothers. It always amazed me that however many they shot at the same time, they were all done on the same set, just dressed up to look a little bit different. Peckinpah also had some history with TV Westerns. I know he was a big part of The Rifleman early on. There was that really dark series. I don't know if you remember it, The Westerner with Brian Keith.
Yeah, the Westerner was great, and it only lasted a year because Brian Keith plays the guy who was different. He didn't want to have conflict. He didn't like guns. He was sort of afraid of conflict, but is a decent guy. That was a really underrated show. The Rifleman, it was more clever than I think. I watched some recently, and I couldn't believe how much story they crammed into like 18 minutes or whatever. Plus, Chuck Connors was a AAA baseball player.
Yes, yes. If they ever did a baseball movie, he might have been able to pull it off. You have Kevin Costner, of course, who's one of the central characters of Bull Durham. And one of the things that I always thought made the movie work so well was he could play ball a little bit. The only other actor that comes off the top of my head, and you make a reference who actually worked with him, was Kurt Russell, who played minor league baseball as well. How difficult is it to cast a sports movie when the main characters may not necessarily be able to play the sport that you're working with in the film?
Well, I can't do it. And so I have a couple scripts I haven't been able to make because I haven't figured out how to cast it. Another baseball movie, as a matter of fact, about a pitcher for the Yankees who ends up in the Latin American leagues. And it's very hard to find a 30-year-old who can pull that off. So it's tough. Kevin can play a lot, not a little. He's a really good athlete, high school baseball player in Southern California. Kurt Russell played in the minor leagues. So it's a very, very short list. Maybe there's two guys on it that could pull it off.
How difficult was it to get Tim Robbins to be able to appear as if he could pitch?
Well, Tim was actually a decent baseball player. He never pitched before, and he had to learn the mechanics. And I think he's been unfairly criticized for his mechanics. I think they're a lot better than people know. As I point out in the book, if I had an actor that had a delivery like Clayton Kershaw, that actor and I would be criticized. But if it's actually Clayton Kershaw, all is forgiven. There's a lot of, I mean, if I had an actor stand on the mound and looking for a sign like Craig Kimbrell, I'd be laughed at. But if it's Craig Kimbrell, but there's a bunch of guys like that. I mean, my favorite player I ever played against was Louis Tiant. But if an actor did that, he'd look silly.
There's one other thing that pops up in the book as you're talking about that. One of my favorite scenes in the movie is where Costner's character gives away the pitch that's coming in. And you met Joe Garagiola and Johnny Bench, and Garagiola said he had a problem with the movie because no catcher would ever do that. Johnny Bench said, no, I did it all the time.
It happened to me in the minor leagues. I talk about it. And sometimes it's because the catcher was angry at the pitcher, or he wanted to show the pitcher up because the pitcher wasn't listening to him. And other times it was just to get in the batter's head, which, it's the bat. If you're a batter and the catcher says curveball, do you believe him? I talk about 3 times in the book about when a guy told me that and I didn't swing, and I still think about it to this day because it was the worst curveball I've ever seen.
Ron Shelton, my guest this morning here at 105.5 WDHA, the new memoir about the making of Bull Durham called The Church of Baseball, The Making of Bull Durham. In the movie, you deal a lot with the game within the game. There's that scene where Costner's character is thinking as he gets into the batter's box. He hasn't even seen a pitch yet. And he tells himself, you got to get out of the box. Get Annie out of your head. Get out of the box. And I was thinking, we had the Mets and Yankees play each other recently. Scherzer on the mound, Judge up at the plate. And Scherzer's already struck Judge out twice on sliders. So as I'm watching the game myself, I'm thinking along with it. Don't think it can only hurt the ball club, but I'm thinking, all right, I think he's going to come fastball in because Judge has got to be looking slider away. He doesn't. He goes slider away and gets that third strikeout in the game. The game within the game has always fascinated me. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of Bull Durham, Ron, is that you were able to really capture all of that so beautifully.
Well, there's many games within the game going on, and I try to get inside the batter's head and the pitcher's head, and the coach's heads. Look at any hitter. Most hitters have this internal monologue trying to guess. Great hitters say they guess. I wish somebody told me that in the minors. I'd have been a better hitter. Just guess more. Henry Aaron said he guessed his whole life. Ted Williams, the most intelligent hitter ever, and I think maybe the greatest hitter ever when you look at his numbers, really staggering numbers. And he missed 5 years of his prime of his career in the service. So Ted Williams had a monologue going. He would talk to himself. Tony Gwynn, I mean, as good a modern hitter we've ever had. So the hitters that don't do that, there are some. I mean, Pete Rose never saw himself on tape, never hit off a tee, never thought about anything, just saw the ball and hit the ball. But it's a very tricky thing hitting a baseball, and it can play with your mind. And hopefully the movie gets into that a little bit.
Ron Shelton, my guest at 105.5 WDHA. I have a bit of a baseball background in addition to this radio career I have. I've coached youth and high school baseball for quite a while. I've been very fortunate to work at a couple of different instructional facilities and have worked with a number of minor league players and major leaguers as well, and had the chance to spend 2 years in the minor leagues, although in the front office. And one of the things I thought the movie captured so well was it really got to the essence of what is, I worked for an independent team here in New Jersey, the Newark Bears. You referenced minor league promotions in the movie as well. I'm wondering if you've seen anything that the Savannah Bananas have done.
Yeah, they sort of they're promotions on steroids, but I also referenced, Bill Veeck was one of the greats. Invented this, and then his son Mike Veeck has carried it to new heights, in St. Paul and with other teams. I mean, Mike Veeck has had he had prostate cancer night. You get a prostate exam, you get in free. He's done things. He had worst attendance in the history of baseball night, where you buy a ticket, but they don't let you in until after the bottom of the fifth because that's when they take attendance. So the attendance was zero. Veeck is sort of the Michelangelo of this stuff.
One of the things you talk about in the book is as you're writing a screenplay, you have to listen to the characters who you're creating. Which one of the characters in Bull Durham spoke the loudest to you?
Well, Crash probably, just my age was more similar. My career was more similar. He has this sort of sense of professionalism and a little bit of righteous anger, and but he's still a dreamer. So he's always trying to balance those things. So I think probably Crash.
You developed the characters so incredibly well, whether it was Annie or Nuke Lelouch. I didn't realize that there was a real Ebby Calvin Nuke. Granted, the last name was a little different. I didn't realize that you had pulled that from a real person, though. I knew about Crash Davis.
Yeah, this was a waiter in Columbia, South Carolina. Came up to me when I was driving around the minors. wondering if there was still a movie to be made down there. And he said, I'm Ebby Calvin LaRouche, but you can call me Nuke. And I wrote that down as fast as I can on a cocktail napkin. And I changed LaRouche to LaLouche immediately because there was a crazy, Lyndon LaRouche was a crazy, wacky politician at the time. And I asked this waiter, how do you spell Nuke? And he said, nobody ever asked him that. So he didn't even know how to spell his name. I thought, that's my guy. That's my guy.
Bull Durham, again, one of my favorite movies, and Ron Shelton, whose new memoir, The Church of Baseball, The Making of Bull Durham, our guest here at 105.5 WDHA. Early on in your career, you came across a number of scripts you were reading. Platoon was one of them. What stood out for you the most about that?
Well, this was after I'd become a story editor in Hollywood. And I talk in the book about good writing just separates itself from the rest of the pack. And the producer I was working for had this script Platoon written by a guy named Oliver Stone. Nobody knew who that was. And it was just so superior. And it was obvious because it was about being in the trenches of Vietnam and all the grunt soldiers. And it was clear that he had been there because nobody could have written it who hadn't been there the way he put it on the page. And which is how I want Bull Durham to feel. You know, you couldn't have made that up if you hadn't been there and lived it. And Platoon was just real. It was real. Every line of it was real. And we couldn't get it off the ground. It took a few years before somebody else got it made. And, you know, it did $400 million worldwide business. And, but at the time, nobody would make it, which was kind of the story of Bull Durham.
Yeah. How long did it take you to get Bull Durham made?
Well, it was pretty quick, except, I mean, within a year of writing it, except all the studios kept passing on it. So even when I had Kevin Costner committed to it, the studios passed 2 times. And I kept going back to them and going back. And I got lucky. The story's in the book, but I had like 12 hours left, or Kevin was going to go do another movie. And Orion Pictures called from New York because they had a movie opening. No Way Out opened. And that was their movie. It opened on a Friday. Got great reviews in the New York Times. And the New York Times said Kevin Costner is going to be a movie star. So they called back and said, we're making Bull Durham. But if the New York Times didn't like No Way Out, we wouldn't have made Bull Durham.
One of the other things that's in the book, and I'm always fascinated by this, there are a number of alternate scenes that are written into the book and then eventually either didn't get done or were left on the cutting room floor. When that sort of thing happens, how difficult is it to keep the continuity going of a film when you have to cut out a scene that's already been filmed?
Well, that's a good question, especially because I tend to layer things in so that little things in one scene become big things in another. You know, it's amazing if the movie is better without a scene, you don't miss it because you haven't. How can you miss something you don't know exists? Um, and there's not a lot of plotting in Bull Durham. It's easy to jump. I mean, where does Jimmy and Millie get married suddenly? And how did that happen? You know, they picked each other up in the parking lot. And the next scene, there's a marriage. You know, and there was 2 or 3 scenes that set up the wedding, and they all hit the cutting room floor. And nobody cared. So it's amazing how audiences will take the jump with you if you know if you've got them on board.
Where do you think Crash Davis would be now?
Well, he'd be Buck Showalter. He would.
Very
He
good
would
answer.
Yeah.
Very good answer. What about Nuke?
He'd be trying to learn a knuckleball in the Venezuelan league.
Would Annie still be in the Carolina League?
Well, how they could survive with all of together with all of Crash's wanderings in the minors trying to get to the big leagues is hard to say. It's kind of why I never made a sequel. But I think you know, she might be teaching at the Sorbonne in Paris or head of an English department at Duke.
As I mentioned to you, I spent a lot of time coaching youth and high school baseball. I cannot tell you how many times I've used that line. Don't think it can only hurt the ball club. The book is called Church of Baseball, The Making of Bull Durham. Ron Shelton, thank you so much for spending time with us here on WDHA, and best of luck with the book.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.